Hello everyone, welcome to the Meet the Architects panel discussion. I really look forward to introducing you now to Simon Topliss, who's an Associate Director with JCB Architects, Milica Tumbas, who's a Principal Architecture with Llovell Chen, Kieran Leong, Associate for DesignInc, Simon Farr, Associate for Architectus, and Kellee Frith, Education and Environment Strategist with Architectus. I've asked our 5 panelists actually 4 very different questions about their very personal passive house journey. They've been on either for many, many years or only started on very recently. So please join me. I really look forward to hearing about your experience with the passive house standard. And then also after your presentation to have a bit of a discussion just where you think this conversation or where this journey is going to. So thank you all for joining me. I'd like to hand over to Simon, who has some first-hand experience in delivering a very large-scale passive house project and working very closely and effectively with the contractors on that journey. So thank you, Simon, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Johanna, the Passive House Association for inviting me along today, and welcome to all the other panelists joining me as well. Is my screen sharing okay there?
Yes.
Great, fantastic. So, yeah, Johanna's asked me to talk to this rather curly subject of early contractor involvement, or ECI as we call it, and I sort of term it as getting your passive house hands dirty early doors with the contractor so that you can grow that passive house garden strong. And as Johanna alluded to, I'm not speaking to this as a project manager or as a QS, but actually as an architect who's had some really positive experiences with ECI or the ECI model. So why ECI and passive house? What is early contractor involvement? It's the potential to gain input from the contractor or construction manager on the design as it's being developed. Potentially, you can have discrete parts of the work performed and long lead times items ordered before all elements of the design have been finalised. Potentially have greater transparency as you move through contractor pricing and subcontractor pricing, and maybe even gives the possibilities of completing a project faster than maybe otherwise the case. So I suppose with regards to passive house, and especially I suppose innovative construction, is early contractor involvement one of the crucial ingredients that we should be looking at, especially on larger scale, on medium to larger scale projects and even smaller projects, and how important is it to deliver not just affordable but successful passive house projects within Australia at the moment. And so when I began looking at this topic, it was interesting going back to previous sort of passive house presentations and looking at some of the lessons learned that we'd flagged in those presentations. And when regards to early contractor involvement, I think this is where it really becomes relevant. And these ideas of it's never too early, in my opinion, to engage with the industry early, especially when you're dealing with very innovative construction techniques and different to business as usual. Everyone on site is doing things differently. In respect of that, you need to be able to get everybody on board as early as you can to how you need to go about those different techniques on site, different construction techniques, different detailing. The market in Australia is still very immature. It was immature when we started Gillies. It's getting better now, and there's more procurement possibilities. But it is a challenging market to still be delivering large scale passive house buildings within. You need everybody to understand the cost premium, and this is where ECI can really become quite a powerful tool. And there is undoubtedly, to me, success is always born out of great collaboration. So I suppose that's where ECI really sort of comes in rounds out the whole picture. So Gillies Hall, which was the project we delivered completed at the start of 2019. And I suppose why I'm speaking to it is we survived the procurement model, or a completely crazy procurement model in a sense, where we started the project, where began our consultancy in July 2017 and delivered the project, completed 19 months later on 30th of January 2019, ready for students mid-February. And to do this, we worked with an ECI procurement model, essentially to bring in the contractor early at the very end of schematic design, during design development, have them working with us through design development, looking at the long lead time items procurement, and we're also working with Mass Timber on the project, get them on board with the passive house journey that we were all trying to go on as a design team and client, so that when we were documenting the CLT, procuring our long lead time passive house items from the time from Europe, we were able to get those actually before we had settled on a GMP contract at the end of design development, essentially before we even got into final documentation. And it gave us the ability to not just do this project really, really quickly, but actually get everybody on board early and make sure that we were all working towards this successful end target. I sort of say, it's never to engage with the industry, never too early to engage with the industry. And, there are reasons for this, long and muscle, but they really come down to procurement, understanding procurement of materials on site. And in this image, we've got the CLT panels from Gillies Hall, and especially with regards to, say, the construction logistics, understanding the construction, the constructability. It's something like mass timber, and passive house is never simply about the detailing. It's about how you can actually sequence it on site. What are the supplier options available to the market? We might be designing something and we might be specifying something that simply can't be procured within the timeframes of a project. We all know that, and we're finding project timelines are getting tighter and tighter. And so ECI allows us to sort of work through some of those issues early. And of course, coordination of the design in regards to, and that sort of comes back into constructability, not just coordinating it amongst the design team, actually having a builder there at the table, understanding how things need to go together and what's the best way for them to go together to get their smarts into the project. In passive house, we know everyone is doing things differently, especially on site. The detailing, the sequencing, materials, suppliers, and most importantly, the QA requirements. On Gillies Hall, just the very basic ideas of passive house, where you're wrapping the building externally in insulation, is an absolute mile away from standard industry practice. And you have to, of slapping up precast panels and pouring slabs into the back of them and throwing a bit of insulation on the inside. We're really trying to change the industry and change the thinking and change how we work on site. So we need to be cognizant of that. And I think having in the ECI model, everybody is at the table early, understanding that. The market and the profession is still very immature. QSs see risk. QSs see risk on a project as contractors see dollars and clients get nervous. So I think if we need to be able to communicate and consult with the market to bring these innovative construction techniques on site. And this drawing on screen was really typical of that. Working with Multiplex as our ECI contractor, we all needed to try and understand where the gaskets were going, where the taping was going, what was the quantity of taping involved on the project. A whole other language that none of us had really worked with. And it needed to be procured, it needed to be sourced, and it needed to have suppliers and subcontractors on site deliver it. Everybody needs to understand the cost premium and get a chance to explain it. Business as usual detailing is not an option, and bringing anybody on the journey is fundamental to achieving the right outcomes. Business as usual, the typical typical sill detail on the right, and then our passive house detail for Gillies on the left. This was really confronting to Multiplex, the builder at the time. I'm seeing a really elaborate passive house detail, but bringing them on the journey, explaining why we needed to do it, got them on board, and managed to get those sort of more complicated passive house details over the line. Success is always born out of great collaboration. Working independently of the team who's going to build your project, to me, is quite frankly absurd when the design gets really complex. This sketch is the services riser, which has our mech supply and extract in it. Anybody who's done a student accommodation building knows that these are probably the most, or any sort of the incredibly complicated areas in the building where there is a lot of hands involved in the process. And one of the most important hands, quite frankly, and I say it, is the builder. They're the ones who have to build it and sequence it and source it, and they're really complicated parts of the building. And to have them on board when you're detailing it with everybody at the table is, to my mind, incredibly important. But it's not all roses in the ECI model. There is a danger that constructability starts to take precedence over design. And as the design team, you need to manage that in this model. Maintaining a level of competitive tension to achieve your tender outcomes is key. So you need to work in an ECI model, have good QSs, good project managers, and have a work through that open book sort of testing to make sure that you still get competitive tension in the model. Good advice is never free. In an ECI model, ECI contractors will often essentially they're providing constructability advice, and that may come as a cost. With regards to Gillies Hall, we were very lucky that there was enough interest in the project from Multiplex that they actually offered the advice for free, and essentially we then paid for it back in the preliminaries once they got the project. But you need to realise that that is good advice, and that you actually want to have that on board. And there are many different ways to skin your ECI cat, in a sense. You can have, as we did, have a contractor involved at the table in early schematic design development. You could be working with 2 contractors as you move through documentation, so that everybody is aware of the project moving forward. So everybody's aware of the detailing and costs and risks. Essentially, it's about de-risking the project and getting everybody to have buy-in. But I suppose if I sort of said if ECI was green, it would look something like this. And this was a sort of diagram that we made at the end of, I suppose, Gillies understanding, because I always sort of said, in a sense, Gillies felt a lot easier than I was sort of told Passive House was going to be. And I think there were 3 really key ingredients to that. And one was rigorous design, 10 commitment, and quality construction, and these all come around collaboration and this sort of green gold in the middle of the whole plan. And that is really, I think, how you deliver complex, innovative projects that are really trying to change the way that we build. And there will be doubters. So in a sense, ECI is a chance to silence them. The QSs, the project managers, those involved in the project who maybe don't quite see it as we do, and who don't quite get it on board. So de-risking it and having using every tool in your arsenal to get everybody on board in the project is really key. And that's my little piece on ECI. So hopefully that gives you something to think about and hopefully something to work with on your future projects. Thank you, Johanna.
Perfect, Simon. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that exciting journey. Cool. Would you do it again?
Most definitely. We still are.
Great. That's good to hear. I'd like to introduce you again to Milica. Milica, please join me. So, as I mentioned before, Milica Tumbas, a principal architecture with Llovell Chen, who has got many years of experience in delivering passive house projects, and to make it even more complicated, mainly in the context of heritage buildings. We really look forward, Milica, to hearing about your passive house journey in context of heritage buildings. Thank you.
Thanks, Johanna. Can you see my screen? Llovell Chen is involved in the continued and contemporary life of many of the national's iconic 19th and 20th century buildings. The primary focus of our current work is the development of strategies to address the complexities that arise with the adaptive reuse and design and development of new schemes in heritage context, as well as addressing sustainability and longevity of the heritage buildings with an intent to achieve appropriately balanced outcome. We have been actively searching for a tool to ensure a sustainable and affordable future for heritage buildings. And we found that the NFIT is that tool that gives us a guide, equipped us, architects, consultants, stakeholders with the key information on how to achieve measurable performance, that at the end of the process they receive a building that the parameters of that building and performance of that building is known. It's a practical guide for effective retrofit throughout all stages of a project to the NFIT standard. It's a very successful and measured outcome tailored to suit available budgets and programs, enables delivery of energy efficient building, reduces the risk of surface condensation and mold growth, which is very important for heritage buildings, and almost achieves the passive house standard. And we see a great potential of applying NFIT to all existing building stock, and particularly to heritage buildings, because we need to retain existing structures. We need to retain existing heritage values, improve indoor environmental quality, energy consumption in line with the carbon reduction. We need to examine retrofit building energy performance and qualitative evaluation of indoor environmental quality, which is very important, particularly now in the current situation. It allows us to examine optimum whole of life cost of retrofit options, and internal retrofit internal retrofit is usually a likely approach in heritage buildings due to significance of the facades. It's a great potential, and we're working to lower the cost to make comfortable buildings for various uses, provide fresh and filtered air, support health and well-being of the occupants. It's very sustainable, and now the results are showing that they are sustainable. There is a very low energy consumption, reduces plant requirements enormously. It's a low maintenance, easy to monitor performance. It really provides a future proof for the heritage buildings, and provides at least 50-year cycle. We are facing various issues with existing buildings. We find them in different states. Existing conditions vary. Some of the buildings are in dilapidated state. So we're facing exposed, uninsulated walls, edge of slabs, thermal bridges of different sorts, solid concrete and masonry structures, exposed solid concrete, mullions, thermal bridges, perpendicular walls, aluminium and steel windows, poor performance glazing, lack of external shading, leaky buildings. All of them are leaky buildings. And if the heritage listed building, if the building is also heritage listed building, a number of constraints apply to the approach. Facades are also different to all of the buildings that we're working with. Masonry, concrete, prefabricated steel frame, concrete curtain walls, masonry curtain walls, framed glass, slab buildings, complex facades with different approach to curtain walls, and sunshades. Windows that we find on heritage buildings could be framed, steel framed, timber framed, or no framed at all. The existing glazing is usually 3 to 4 millimeter clear float glass, mounted with a range of framing systems. It can be installed in stone, in masonry, in timber. Very poor performance. So we have now applied NFIT on a number of heritage buildings, including 19th century buildings, which are actually very challenging to work with. This is Old Quad, which you're probably familiar with. It's at the heart of the University of Melbourne campus. It's the first university building in Australia, and the development ranges from 1854 to 1981. This is a completed project, just a couple of pictures. The building has a number of areas, and which area required a different approach, so different fabric, different existing wall construction, roof construction, floor constructions. So we have taken various approaches on this particular building, testing various systems, identified the NFIT envelope, air tightness envelope where possible, and dealt with the issues. This is a recently a completed project. It's an early 20th century masonry house that was in a very poor state. It has been fully refurbished, so it's two parts. The existing building, our approach was an NFIT standard, and then there is an extension at the back that is a passive house, done as a passive house. This is the outcome of that project that really provides a really healthy environment to live in. We're working on a weatherboard houses with slightly different approach, different detailing, different challenges. More recent buildings, 1990s. This is a house done for the parents of the current owner. They decided to stay in the house, and now they are retrofitting it to an NFIT standard. And we have ventured into industrial buildings, working with a number of industrial sites. We see a great opportunity to implement NFIT. This is an interesting project at Richmond Maltings that is going to be delivered in two stages. One is an envelope of the building, and then the full NFIT is going to be retrofitted at stage 2. And we are taking a very careful approach, making sure that the stages are synchronized. We see a great potential in 20th century modern high-rise buildings. There is a huge stock of these buildings, some of which are now heritage listed, and particularly buildings mid of 20th century are really poor performers that and they're not that difficult to retrofit, challenging, but still we see a great potential and ability to retrofit them. Post 1970s, there is more consideration to energy consumption, and we can see improvements in the building fabric. There also a lot of buildings have been demolished because of the poor performance, complex adaptive reuse requirements, density requirements, inadequate heritage protection, and really lack of energy and affection to deal with these buildings. But we still see, particularly in the current climate where the budget might be important, it is really important to deal with these buildings. And also there is a dilemma whether to demolish or not demolish if it's not a heritage listed building. But we believe that there is a huge embodied energy in those buildings, and the recycling and demolition of these buildings is very expensive if done properly. So we see a really huge potential in retrofitting of these buildings and making sure that there is a reduction in plant, reduction in energy, and we deliver healthier buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Milica. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. I have to say, I mean, every time we talk, hats off to you, yeah, in delivering the passive house standard in context of heritage buildings. I bet it's not easy. I'd like to introduce you to Kieran Leong, who's an associate with DesignInc, and Kieran is also currently on a passive house journey, closing out the design of a very exciting community passive house project here in Melbourne. So welcome, Kieran, and I really look forward to hearing more about this project and your experience, designing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Johanna. So the title that I'm talking about today is the not so perfect passive house, or why passive house doesn't have to be perfect. As Johanna mentioned, this is our first passive house project that we've been working on at DesignInc, and we were engaged by Moreland City Council to do this project in Glenroy, 13 kilometres north of the centre of Melbourne. And when we started on this project, our focus was about how we were going to create a great space for the community, how we could have all these complex stakeholder groups in the same building, how they might work together, and with a real focus on allowing natural experiences and bringing in those natural experiences from the outside within. So whether that's daylighting, views to the outside, plants, all of that kind of nice stuff in buildings. At the end of our concept design phase, our clients had this great idea to make it a passive house certified project. And we were incredibly enthusiastic about this. And then we needed to figure out how we're actually going to do it. So with our team, and I think it's really important to highlight that, there's teamwork. It never would have been achieved without the input of especially the key people you see down the bottom there. I'm going to share some of the challenges that we faced along the way. Rapid fire, sort of easy, moderate, hard, and generally our responses went along the lines of either adopting some accepted passive house construction methods or components, adapting more local systems that we were more comfortable with, or perhaps are more common around Australia and New Zealand. And then at times when there was a compromise between both ways of doing things. So getting straight into it, in easy, the floor slab, we basically just built that the same as we would have had to in a normal building. Some of the mixed ducts, we're a little bit worried about having external ducts and if we might have to provide all this additional insulation to them. And the scope and scale of the building, which we'll kind of come back to and touch on throughout this presentation, a little bit of outside ductwork was fine, but we were aiming to get the best performance possible. So bringing it into the thermal envelope wherever we could was the desired solution. The other one, so wall insulation, the wall build-ups, it's quite a complex process, but the thing that was relatively easy and also surprising was that our final specification for the performance, the thermal performance of our wall envelope ended up at R2.7, basically 90 millimeters of insulation, which was a lot lower than I think anyone expected initially on the project. So moving up to some moderately challenging issues that we faced. The earlier stages of the project, we were aiming to use a locally sourced, thermally broken, double glazed windows for the project from a supply perspective, also from a cost perspective, and we worked with facade engineers to protect the most thermally vulnerable part of those windows, which was the frame, which involved this custom detail, which you see where it actually bridges over the frame. At the later stages, so for the contract documentation stage, we were novated to building engineering, who are the contractors for it. We resolved amongst the design team to adopt passive house certified windows as a way of de-risking that solution at a cost, but that was seen as a benefit to the project. Again, further to the windows, door thresholds, Simon touched on in elements of this. The support of them is one thing. The other thing was actually getting a DDA compliant ramp or threshold for this public building, and how we would resolve that. It basically involved getting a customized threshold plate and ramp leading up to it. Things got a little bit harder with our walls. So beyond just the pure insulation specification, we have several walls that are running over 2 levels anyway, where we have masonry veneer that's supported by steel structure. Now, our wall system that we ended up with was a masonry veneer in front of a cavity. We've got our vapor barrier insulation layer sitting behind that steel structural zone, the air tightness layer, and then a service cavity behind. And we were talking with some of the suppliers at ProClimate and with the products that we were using in order to refine that, as well as working with facade consultants and some inputs as well from Detail Green. Starting on the outside, with masonry, there was the challenge of the thermal bridges in a few locations. One of them, whenever our bricks were coming down to touch the slab. Resolution of that was to use a Novamur thermally broken block around the bottoms of all of these walls. And the other one, which was a bit more of an issue where we adapted and adopted solutions, was the external openings. If we were using steel as lintels for this, it was actually creating a bridge across the thermal envelope of our building. So with some clever help from our engineers, TTW, we came up with a solution to customize some of the blocks from the same suppliers that we were using and create custom bond beams across all of the external openings and remove the thermal bridge in those areas. And then structural steel, we've got our steel bridging both vertically and horizontally the thermal envelope. So we've utilized several of these structurally thermally broken isocrylb products, and they're throughout the building. It's been carefully considered. It's quite a process to go through and identify where all of those needed to be and how they would relate to the wall and roof insulation layers. So things got even harder when we started to look at heritage building. Milica, I'm sorry, it's not that we dislike heritage buildings. This one just proved very challenging. So the heritage building was an integrated part. It was a heritage listed old primary school building on the site, and our initial intent was to include this within our passive house envelope, relining walls, floor, ceiling with an airtight and thermal envelope that was suitable for passive house. When we started to investigate the practicalities of doing this, the lining of the building wasn't the issue. It was really the junction between the differing foundation systems of the heritage building versus our new building, and that the potential movement between those two was about 150 to 200 millimeters in any direction, which really proved to be an insurmountable challenge. So we called upon a secret power, which we discovered throughout the process, and we kind of just denied it was there. So with the help of this markup, we managed to exclude the the heritage building from the passive house envelope. That went across to Passive House Certifier and of course across to Passive House Institute as well for approval of that, but they were happy to accept that. Another one which was particularly hard, all libraries have return chutes, and all return chutes are holes in buildings which don't work particularly well from a passive house perspective. So we're pretty confident after the resolution for the heritage building and thought, why don't we do this again for the returns room? Can we exclude this from the passive house envelope? It didn't go so well. So then it was back to the drawing board, and we were looking at options that we could adapt or adopt. Can we use an amazing performing automatic dog door? Could we put the returns bin into an airtight cupboard? Could we use some big, probably not these Ziploc bags, but you get the idea. Can we use a big airtight bag sealed to the back of it? In the end, the practicalities of public access, of how the librarians actually worked, meant that it was none of these solutions were going to be acceptable for a multitude of reasons why. So we called in the experts. We visited a library with John from Efficiency Matrix, who's going to be doing the airtightness testing, looked at some return chutes. You can see by the light coming through, they don't really seal particularly well, but in his words, the resolution was to MacGyver it. So we're going to use the preferred return chute, the locally available one, and he's going to build up a test rig. We're going to blow some air through it. We're going to see how airtight we can get it. And I think that, you know, the important thing about this is in the context of a building of this scale, a little bit of leakiness is actually okay. So in conclusion, what did we learn? It's definitely a balancing act. It's definitely having the team involved and all different parties with different perspectives on things. And the balancing act of lower wall insulation, a little bit of leakiness, and some thermal bridging was something which was sort of surprising to me when I thought at the start, from the outside looking in, at Passive House, it's a very hard and fast, rigid rating system. I think that we had the ability to have some of this inherent flexibility because of the scale of the building as well. So thank you very much, Johanna.
Thank you, Kieran. Awesome. The not so perfect passive house. Look, to me, it doesn't look like there's anything wrong with it, but it's just that you had a couple of challenges, or quite a few challenges, but it looks like you got some great solutions, and thank you so much for sharing those. Awesome. Let me introduce you to Kellee and Simon. So Simon and Kellee are both from Architectus, and Simon is an associate, and Kellee is Architectus Education and Environment Strategist. And Simon and Kellee will be talking about their current focus in the passive house world, which is on education. And when I talk about education, then I talk about both. So in relation to the projects they're working on, but also in relation to upskilling and educating their own team on passive house and high performance buildings in general. So thank you very much, Kellee and Simon, for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing about how you're tackling the education sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna. As you mentioned, we are in the very early stages of our passive house journey, and we definitely still have our training wheels on. We were inspired by a Sustainability in Education forum late last year to learn more about sustainability in general, but passive schools in particular. And today we'd like to share with you a bit about our knowledge sharing platform, EdTalks, some self-assessment and benchmarking we've done as a starting point on our passive school journey, and finally why we think passive schools could be so significant for education. So EdTalks is our national education sector knowledge sharing platform. As a group, we have a specific interest in passive school and passive design principles. None of us is an expert, so instead we're all learning together. We've got some pretty definite aims, the first of which is to develop our passive design literacy so we can have meaningful conversations with passive design experts who we're collaborating with on school design projects. And the second is to understand how good design practice, including building orientation, active cross-ventilation systems and indoor light quality intersects with passive design principles. There's great enthusiasm amongst our younger staff who are getting involved with desktop research, preparing and presenting, and there's certainly lots of material available for them to work with. We share this knowledge sharing platform via Teams. We do a fortnightly presentation alternating between a cultural and technical aspect of sustainability. And we also share recordings of that to enhance our knowledge sharing reach. I'll hand over to Simon to tell you about our self-assessment and benchmarking.
So one of our first tasks was to understand where we sit, what we're doing well and what we could improve on. We've started with a bit of a DIY self-assessment here where we looked at 3 of our previous private school projects, relatively recent, to see where we had done quite well. We noticed we'd done well in the insulation, advanced windows, external shading and ventilation, and the areas that needed a bit more improvement, or that we could say we almost suck at, would be the looking at air tightness and the thermal bridging. So we've really been able to focus on where we need to, focus our activities really. And the other main reason for doing this was to just point out to our staff through this exercise that this isn't an insurmountable task and that this is an evolution of what we are basically already doing. So we're just adding a few more steps into the processes and the outcomes that we've typically been achieving. If you could flick slides, Kellee, that'd be great. Now, this is a master planning exercise for a recent public high school. We did a review of this delivered project to consider how passive house principles could be reapplied over this project in the master planning stages, and just give us an idea of how we could be using buildings to shade each other, creating undercrops for learning, and all the potential
possibilities there that the principals could then offer to this project, and to get our staff invested in this as a concept. And again, Kellee, thanks. One of the ones we've here, a project that we have continued to return to is the Wilkinson Primary School in Bilston in the UK. This keeps becoming a reference point for us because it had a strong focus on post-occupancy evaluation, and as we continue on our passive house journey, we would like to reconsider how we could use post-occupancy evaluations here in the Australian context, and then also look at this for senior schools and in the tertiary environment. Here we're just looking at some data. The first one here is some, this is also from the UK, but some shocking points here about the air quality. Our target, we would ideally like to be somewhere between the 500 to 900 parts per million. We can see some incredible spikes in these diagrams. So we've found those to be a really powerful tool for our staff to understand, and we think also that when this sort of material is taken to a client, it's I think it's going to have a real, we think it's going to have a real impact. The other thing to note there is that one of the strongest points that we've been able to find in terms of published work and sort of driving our the key benefit for us is an April 2020 study that looked at the relationship between classrooms and air quality and learning outcomes for children. This study was able to demonstrate a 5% increase in number of children passing exams, a 2% reduction in test errors, and a 12% increase in the speed that psychological and school tasks were performed. This is obviously significant education. For us, this is the key driver for undertaking passive schools and promoting this to our staff and to our clients. And we've got one more there, Kellee. And this here is an example of a reverse brief that was developed to take back to our client at a very early stage in the project. This is during a bid phase to demonstrate how the passive house principles or passive school principles could be integrated into this project. The key driver here is that we settled on a figure of a 6% reduction in the gross floor area. And that was taken from non-prescribed areas such as circulation, so that we could then introduce these initiatives while keeping the project on budget and deliver a cost-neutral strategy. I'm going to hand back to Kellee.
Thanks, Simon. There's a real burden of responsibility, I suppose, on young people and children in the face of climate change. And as a practice, we feel that we have a responsibility to design school buildings that are as sustainable as possible. And in relation to our clients, we think, we really can't afford to wait for our clients to ask for this kind of intelligent design solution. Instead, we've got a responsibility to start that conversation. And by making passive design principles explicit to school communities, then they'll know how their buildings are contributing to improved school experience and reduced energy consumption. And we can see a real opportunity in this to empower students and teachers as agents in addressing climate change, which in turn would positively influence student mental health and well-being, both of which are directly linked to learning outcomes, which is part of why we see passive houses being such a significant contribution to education. That combined with the point that Simon made earlier about the increased levels of concentration, so students are able to engage more fully in their learning, but it's also helping their psychological well-being, that they're empowered in that conversation about making a positive difference to climate change. And by making building energy and data accessible via data loggers, these things can be used in teaching and learning, as well as for future curriculum development. So again, the building itself becomes a pedagogical tool. And we've found that Woodley School in Langwarrin, Victoria is a significant example for us because of its innovative education program, which has a strong emphasis on sustainability, as you can see from this environment here where the school is located. And the building or the built environment is part of a total learning system, and students can learn about the thermal management of their buildings via the thermal labyrinth under one of the homesteads, a little diagram you can see of that on the left. And they can also see how rainwater is directed from the school buildings down a chain link downpipe and into the landscape. So we're really looking forward to learning more from the building and building on the work of Law Architects and many others so that we can continue our passive house journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kellee and Simon. I really enjoyed it, learning about your journey and where you're at. And yeah, delivering, I'm sure, some very successful passive house projects. So I'd like to ask Simon and Milica and Kieran to join us again. Perfect, here you are. Okay, thank you. So I've introduced you to our 5 presenters and panelists, but I have to admit I haven't really introduced myself. My name is Johanna Trickett. I'm a board director for partnerships for the Australian Passive House Association, and I have to say I really enjoyed the diversity of those 4 different presentations, but also angles in how we're talking about the passive house standard. And I'd say it's clear that the Australian passive house community has very much matured over the last couple of years, at least since I've been involved. And with my partnerships hat on, I'd like to ask the panelists the first question, which is in relation to sharing passive house knowledge. So from your experience, what do you think? How important is it to share the knowledge in relation to the passive house or high performance buildings in general, the design and construction standard? Are there any stories or recommendations that you'd like to share with the audience? So, Kellee, Simon, I know sharing knowledge, whether that's with your client, whether that's internally, is a big topic for you. What do you think? How important is it? And do you have any stories that come to your mind that you feel the audience should know about?
Yeah, look, Johanna, we've found that the knowledge sharing platform of Ed Talks at Architectus has been really critical for us. As when we started the conversations, Simon and I were, only a tiny step in advance of all of our colleagues in terms of our understanding. And as the discussion has gained momentum, everyone's going off and doing their own reading and research and bringing that back and sharing. And we've really noticed just the level of engagement in the discussion at the end of those sessions is really steadily going up as people learn more. So we're yet to sort of really engage in conversations with clients about passive schools yet, but certainly that knowledge sharing and building a dialogue within our organisation has grown exponentially since we've actively started talking together. So yeah, very important.
Yeah, great. And what about Milica, Kieran and Simon sharing knowledge maybe with the wider industry? What's your experience? How's that working for you?
Johanna, it is a critical element, sharing the knowledge, particularly in passive house and NFIT field. It's critical, and we've been engaging with other architects, with suppliers, builders, in developing the schemes, details. We've organised presentations, workshops at the beginning of the projects, not only to the clients, but to stakeholders. And then all of the consultants, not all of the consultants had been familiar with passive house when we started this journey. So it is absolutely critical bringing everyone along the journey and running the process, and sharing the knowledge is a key component of a successful project.
Mike, I can probably attest to that, because I think the first person we called when we were engaged on Gillies Hall was Milica. We said, can we come around and have a chat? Because this sounds pretty hard. You know, I think, you know, as an industry, it's very young. And for all of us to get these projects up, we need to have the whole industry on board. If we sit in our silos and try to hold on to our IP associated with getting the projects over the line, the industry will just go nowhere. So we need to be sharing, we need to be talking, and we need to be engaging as much as we can. And everybody, and you know, we're all here and happy to receive a phone call, because ultimately, for every project that gets up, it makes the next one easier.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess in that sense, I just have to reiterate, thank you so much for you guys sharing your journey. And I've seen some beautiful details, and I'm sure there are lots of people in the audience who are just saying, finally, someone resolved it. Someone resolved those door thresholds, and someone, you know, resolved those sun shading fixing. It's really, really important. I think, Kieran, what was your experience?
Oh, look, I completely agree. I mean, not just with this, but I think that generosity is really important in all things. I think in this practice, you can't really hold on to stuff, and the more that you give away, the more that you can get back as well. I think it's really interesting. Like it's exciting to hear what Architectus is doing in taking that first step forward and approaching clients. Look, we're definitely really excited to do that with some of ours as well, to open people's eyes up who aren't aware of, you know, the potential benefits that they can get. I'm personally, like, it's really exciting on this project that we're working with Moreland City Council on, that they were the ones who came to us asking for it. They want to do passive house because they want to show to other councils that it's completely achievable. They want to be able to achieve it within, you know, a certain budget and other things, so that they can kind of impose, if you call it an imposition, impose these standards on other projects that happen within their municipality. So I think it's really great to see some forward-thinking kind of client groups like that, and then I think it's about sharing it with other people. The other thing that we're currently grappling with and really want to get into, I think, from an internal education point of view, is how we can address or kind of bring this knowledge into projects in our office that aren't necessarily passive house projects, or they aren't quite up to that. But what can we take from what we've learned about these detailing practices and best principles to bring that across to other projects, which doesn't necessarily need to increase cost or other things like that, but give people a higher performing building.
You're making a really good point there, Kieran. You were talking about clients, and that it's not only us as architects or engineers or consultants who are sharing our knowledge and experience with the industry, but it's also clients who are looking to lead and to share their experience with the Passive House Standard. So I'm really keen to hear about your experience from different clients, drivers, and feedback. Like how common is it actually that a client approaches you and says, hey, I definitely want a passive house building? Or if not, how do you approach projects where you think they actually have the potential to become passive house projects, but maybe the client just doesn't know about it yet? And also, for those of you who have already completed a passive house project, I'd love to hear what is some of the feedback that you have received from your clients once they've moved in or occupied the space. Simon, would you like to, what is Monash University's initial response? And yeah, I guess was passive house on the agenda from day one?
Yeah, it was because I think Rob Rumkin from Monash has really been leading the charge there wonderfully, and I think Monash went out to market at that stage with 3 buildings. The Woodside building was targeting passive house at the time, and is now certified, which is fantastic. And Chancellery and Gillies I suppose we were the first ones to sort of get out of the blocks and know we would be constructed first. So we were sort of able to lead that charge for them. So they were bringing it to the table from day one, which was fantastic. And that was all about leadership. Ultimately, if you can, I think you touched on that, Kieran, really well. You know, Moreland City Council wanting to show leadership, and that's actually a really strong driver for clients. That sort of ability to show leadership in this space. And you can't underestimate that, you know, for a client and what that value means to them. You know, I think it's been interesting because that second project for us has taken a really long time. I think we thought with Gillies, you'd just have them starting to walk through the door and clients beating down the hall going, "You guys have done it. Please do it again." That hasn't happened. You know, it's been a long time. The second project has been a long time coming, and even that project's taken a lot of convincing with that client. So it's a really interesting journey, and it's very different. It's very hard to bring people into the fold who don't understand it. And I think, you know, you can't convince those who just can't be convinced. You've got to have clients who kind of get it. And I think the people that have inspired me in the industry the most, generally speaking, are the clients who get it. So, you know, finding them at the moment, I think the diamonds in the rough, so to speak, that's who we all need to be sort of searching out. You know, hopefully we can bring a few people across on the journey that might not have gone there otherwise. But yeah, it's not an easy path at the moment.
I guess what you're also highlighting there, how important it is, and I think was it you, Kellee and Simon, who mentioned the occupancy evaluation, i.e., you know, how's the client appreciating what's working, what's not working, but also how is the client sharing that experience, so that we as designers or consultants and architects, we're not just walking off the job once it's constructed, but we stay engaged, stay involved, and make sure that experience is shared with the wider industry. Milica, what's your experience?
Well,
what are clients saying when they come to you?
Well, some clients are really enthusiastic and come with an idea that they would like a more sustainable building, and then we have an ability then to present Passive House to provide all of the data that would prove that the building will be sustainable and cost effective, and also the cost of running the building will be lower over the time. So that's really important, and that economic factor is important as well. We've done the buildings where we've done an analysis and done the Passive House building with the literally comparable costs to other projects with the same type of buildings. That is the cost per square meter is the same. So if the project is approached from the beginning and we know what we're trying to achieve, the clients come to the journey with us, and we help them through that journey, providing the information as we go, making sure that what is promised at the beginning we are delivering, and that's then monitored, and that gives confidence to the clients. And in the end, all of the clients we worked with are really happy with the outcome, and the stakeholders, the end user, the feedback is really great. So it's a privilege working on the projects where the client and the end user is satisfied.
Great, that's really, really positive to hear. Would anyone else like to share any experience with you know, client interactions, client feedback? No? Okay, I've got a different question, because I have to say one thing I really enjoyed about most of your presentations is you sharing the technical details, and I think we would all agree when it comes to passive house buildings and delivering them successfully, it is very much around you know, understanding and resolving those complicated construction details. So I was wondering, do you have any advice for the audience today, how best to tackle these often, you know, first ever challenges, whether that's a library chute or whether that's, you know, a heritage window that needs to be retained, or whether that's a very challenging buildings user profile. How what's your advice when architects approach or come across those challenges?
If I might jump in, I think that, I mean, in our experience, I mentioned in our presentation that it's definitely having the right sort of team around the table for that. So it's been interesting. We've been completing the documentation, starting construction of this building while we've been in lockdown in Melbourne, and you know, the opportunities that that's created to have workshops that are a lot more accessible to people, and screen sharing, and being able to have this, you know, we had our team of structural engineers, passive house consultants, then additional passive house consultants came on board with the contractor there, as well as services consultants, and everyone being able to sort of get around, mark up this sort of same set of drawings and details, and have this concurrent review and bouncing ideas off each other with, you know, all these different hats on, allowed us to come together for the solution. So I think you know, and then like I said, you know, with the returns shoot, it was kind of reaching out to the right people at the right times, and we found that you know, the people in this sort of industry are here to kind of share and bring people along on the journey. So it was kind of having that core team, and then reaching out to a few sort of specialists, whether it be the suppliers or the testers and other things like that at specific times. Yeah.
Great. Simon and Kellee, what are your thoughts? I remember your presentation, you showed one of the challenges that you want to tackle is your thermal bridging, how you detail for that. Do you have the answers? How do you go about that?
I'm so sure we don't have the answers. Like, I think we've got our training wheels on. We've definitely got our training wheels on looking at this panel, but I think that's quite exciting. So yeah, we don't have the answers yet, but we will have them.
Yeah, great. I mean, and I think Simon, Topliss, you definitely have resolved a fair bit of thermal bridging, and also you, Milica. Do you want to? How do you tackle those when you come across those problems?
I think personally we kept on opening books, looking for precedent details, calling up friends. I think, you know, we had a big issue at the end of Gillies Hall with fire doors, our external fire doors on the project, and again, first person I called was Milica to try and see how they had resolved it on their projects. And you're always coming up with these problems. Like your library chute problem, Kieran, sounds like an absolute doozy. We're just sort of starting a journey on a library at the moment, so that one's noted. Yeah, and you know, I think, you know, we're probably in a fortunate position now where a lot of projects overseas have, in a sense, resolved some of these details. You know, the sill detail we showed was one. You know, it was literally a precedent from a book that we looked at that looked like it could work for us, and we've just got to look at the precedents out there to help us, then adapting them to the Australian condition, the Australian detailing and methodologies. But then I think Kieran, you pointed out a really good point as well. As you sort of move up in scale in buildings, and it's one thing I've noticed, life becomes easier in passive house. The thermal bridges become easier in a sense to deal with, because your overall building envelope and mass is larger, so smaller thermal bridges you can actually get away with more in a sense. So that then I think I've seen, you know, I think when you're dealing with a small house and a very small or large facade envelope to small house area, those trials of resolving some of those details can be really arduous, I think, and you know, getting those thermal details over the line. So yeah, it's a journey for sure, and nothing straightforward.
It's getting easier, but what about Milica? I'm gonna have to say I don't envy you.
Heritage buildings are very complex, and we need to make sure that in doing any intervention we don't lose the significance of the building. But what we also need to deal with is fire rating, which is extremely complex in heritage buildings, as fire rating is also seismic compliance. So if we're looking at all quad building, the scale of interventions was huge, so we had to comply with seismic requirements. So all of the details, thermal bridging, get another level of complexity that might not exist with new buildings. So working in collaboration with all disciplines is a key issue. Negotiating position, even to a tiniest detail, getting even fire-rated doors from overseas that comply with the requirements, and not to mention the hardware. That if you're getting hardware from overseas, then on a public building, it needs to comply with security requirements, fire egress, and it is very complex. That's why it's really important to work with fire engineer, building surveyor, everyone on the team, structural engineer, to achieve a synergy of all of the elements. And detailing is really, really complex, and it requires an understanding not only of heritage but all of the other requirements. So,
and I guess continuing, you make a really good point there, talking about complexity, the complexity of the technical problems. But what about the complexity of a good passive house team? So my first question was around how important is it to share knowledge, and I know we're starting to run out of time, so I'd like to ask one last question. And again, do you have any advice to the audience, and whether that's clients who are in the audience, whether that's other architects or consultants in the audience? What do you think makes up a really good passive house team? What do you think is kind of the number one priority people need to look out for, and what is maybe completely overrated in your experience isn't actually that important at all? Do you want to share some of your experience and advice here?
well, it is important that the client is informed and committed, then the right consultancy team across all of the disciplines. We've learned that WUFI modeling is an absolute must, and it needs to be done in a timely manner, not in the middle of the project or later, or so that needs to be done up front. Costing needs to be tracked all the way through the process, sufficient time for consulting and for documentation, because the current expectation is that you deliver a passive house in a standard way of delivering the project, but you are delivering a lot more complex project and detailing. So how we deal with the lack of time for documentation, dealing with suppliers, really critical, making sure that all of the products are compatible, and also developing a specification, because as we went on this journey, we developed specifications. So now our specification is quite complex around passive house. And then running risk registers, managing the risk, during construction, getting everyone on board, the project manager, the builder, if it's not an early contractor involvement, running information sessions, workshops, explaining what needs to be involved in shop drawings, air tightness. All of these elements are important, and it is important that everyone is on the same page and everyone is committed to delivering a passive house or NFIC project.
Yeah, wow,
Really
great. That was a really, really exhaustive list you mentioned there, and the importance of taking the client on the journey. You spoke about the supplier, the consultant team, but also those, having the specialist consultants on board early and more as a contributor to the design process, rather than just someone who's proving the compliance at the end. Kieran or Simon?
Just
Sorry.
we have separated the role of an architect and passive house consultants so that the process is independent. We've got in-house passive house designers, so we understand that we're speaking the same language, but a great collaboration with passive house consultants, as well as all of the other team members.
Yeah,
great.
I'd agree, Milica. So I think for us, we did have a staff member who was a certified passive house designer. Having someone on board on the team who could immediately sort of jump in and speak the same language while we were still, while the rest of our internal team was getting up to speed was of great value. I think Simon mentioned that, the idea of constructability and balancing that with the design intent. I think it's having the people at the table who can talk to compliance, cost, design intent, and constructability, and find a balance between all of those things is really important, so that you don't get pulled too far in one direction, or you come up with the best result for it. And I think that probably what enabled us to was kind of key for detailing workshops that we had really early at our contract doc phase was the ability to iterate details. So kind of key for that was to have our inputs for the sort of results that we wanted, what we wanted it to look like or appear, having structural team able to provide inputs directly and straight away, and then a passive house consultant who was able to run thermal bridge calculations and moisture and condensation and all of those things, so that we could turn around multiple options of a detail within the course of a day and come to a relatively quick resolution, rather than having to wait and delay that process.
Right.
I think Kieran and Milica answered it in incredible detail. I think that the key ingredient for me is enthusiasm. Having an enthusiastic team. And, I think most of us on Kellee's were new to it, so it was really just about having enthusiasm at the table and calling on experienced ears when you could is really key. And working out who the skeptics are early and somehow trying to silence them, and working on any sort of projects, and either mass timber or passive house where you've got skeptics, and whether they be QSs or project managers, you just got to work through those problems. So enthusiasm's key amongst the team, and having everybody on board and getting everybody engaged with it early.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's really good advice, and I can definitely see, the five of you have a lot of enthusiasm, and I thank you all very much for sharing that enthusiasm as part of the South Pacific Passive House Conference this year, and with our audience, and just sharing your knowledge. I think we've all agreed that it's extremely important to share knowledge, and as I said before, I'm incredibly pleased and proud how far the Australian passive house industry and community have come, because we can see obviously some great projects either being built already or near completion or in the pipeline. So thank you very much, Kellee, Simon, Milica, Kieran and Simon for joining us today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Johanna. Thanks very
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.